Shower the audience with autism.
I suppose we should get into wedges, shouldn't we? Boy, have I been thinking about this long and hard over the last however long.
Yeah, okay.
So I'll admit, I haven't quite got a full definition yet. What I have been doing is basically trying to get straight in my own head what constitutes a wedge and breaking that down into its different forms. So, me being me, I've produced a nice little visual guide, which will be down in the show notes. You have it in front of you, and I don't have it in front of me.
Look who's more prepared now.
Now I've got it.
Damn it.
So, I will now present my thesis on wedges. I've broken it down into 3 styles of wedge. First of all is the feeder wedge, a wedge designed to increase the effectiveness of a weapon, or which is almost integral to the effectiveness of a weapon. Does not have to be a spinner. I would argue that the wedge on, say, Razor or Spectre is a feeder wedge because it gets the Crusher into play. I'd even say that the dustpan of something like Sawblaze or the dustpan of Thor is a form of wedge, a form of feeder wedge even. So that's type number 1. Type number 2 is very simply the wedge flipper. I'm defining that as a wedge that is essentially the full body of the machine, designed to get the whole machine underneath. So the tip of Bronco's flipper, I'm not counting as a wedge flipper. I don't think that's too controversial. I've then added the third category of a defensive wedge, and that is a wedge that is there purely to deflect attacks, pretty much from spinners. It is very important to note that feeder wedges and wedge flipper wedges can be doing this as well. This is very much its sort of squares and rectangles at this point. A defensive wedge, to be specifically a defensive wedge, has no other purpose. Yes, it might be useful in terms of controlling another robot, it might make pushing more effective, but its real purpose is to be there, to be thick, to be heavy, and to deflect blows.
I've just spotted that you've put Iron Ore 6 in this top right category in the image, which is the defensive wedge. And is this because its flipper never works?
Maybe. I've also just realised I've uploaded the wrong version because they were meant to be, it will be correct in the show notes, they were meant to be asterisks, I don't know what the word is, with Tomahawk and Cobra. Because I'm still not sure about wedgelets. That's the thing that's really messing this up for me right now. I'm trying to work out if a wedge needs to be effectively a single piece. And I feel in my heart like it does, or else we wouldn't have the term wedgelet in the first place. So that's as far as I've got. What I think is more interesting, I've given a few examples of things that I don't think are wedges. And I want to quickly talk through the reasons why I've put them there. So I've looked at Behemoth, and that I'm classing as a scoop. I've put Androne 4000 in there because it has forks rather than a wedge or wedgelets. And I'm really not sure what makes me define them that way, but to me, Androne is an easy example of forks rather than wedge. I've put Rusty and Mega Mouse in there as examples of flippers that only get the tip under something. And in that case, they're not wedge flippers. I've put Cranky in there as an example of something that is a shield rather than a wedge. It has a slight gradient on the bottom of it, but to me it's far too steep to really call a wedge. I've kind of done the same with Trolley Rage as well. I think Trolley Rage crosses the line between wedge and just an inclined front. The most controversial one that I really want to know what you think about is Duck. I'm going to argue that Duck does not have a wedge.
So the beak, I guess, of Duck is the thing that's up for debate here. Like I'm sort of assuming the big sort of white sheet of metal is that basically vertical normally?
It is, yeah, and that's why I don't count that part as a wedge. To me, the beak is then a fork.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
I also wasn't sure how to classify Foxic. Foxic and Chimera 2, I've both put straddling different categories. If it was the original Foxic, it would easily go... Actually, it wouldn't even easily go in defensive wedge. That's the thing, because it's tricky to define when it's something like that has those dual purposes. I don't know where to put it. And the second version, especially with the more fox shape, I really don't know what to do with it. My heart says it's not a wedge.
The front of Foxic is clearly a wedge. Clearly.
Why so clear?
Because it's wedge-shaped. You
had to lower the quality of the conversation, didn't you?
No, so I think the difference between like a wedge and a fork is really hard to sort of go with here. But I do think that like the front of Foxy there, I know it's narrow, but I do think that is a wedge. So I've sort of like, but I've been considering what a wedge should be as well, and I think you've touched on a lot of the stuff that I sort of considered about, like, one of the sort of more subtle things is the angle that it gets to. I think anything beyond about 60 degrees is probably not a wedge anymore. But so the front of Foxig, I think for me, like it's like the side view of it, like the side elevation or whatever, is the right shape. I think. I don't think the shape that it is when you look at it from the top matters all that much. I think the fact that it comes down to it tapers off towards the front, I think is fine. I think that's no different to the way that Razor's wedge tapers off as it goes towards the front of it.
Very true. Very true.
So I think Fox 6 is fine as a wedge.
I think really what Fox 6-1 does is show the flaw in my categorizing system because it doesn't fit in any of the three, but it should still probably be a wedge.
Well, this is why, you see, I've been considering this very much in a binary situation of wedge and not a wedge. Makes decisions much easier.
It's a far less interesting diagram, though, isn't it?
It is. It is a less interesting diagram.
I'm trying to think of a different way of demonstrating this. If we could do kind of a sort of scatter plot or something. But I don't know what each axis would be. One would obviously be wedginess. You know, wedginess is an importance factor here. In fact, which of those would you say is the wedgiest wedge?
The wedgiest wedge?
I think it's between two.
I'm sort of torn between rapid and iron ore, I think.
I'm torn between rapid and heavy metal. Because heavy metal isn't even a wedge flipper, it is just a wedge. An invertible wedge at that.
Yeah.
It's a very pure idea of a wedge. The only issue with it is that it's got the sort of sides that are meant to work both ways up and means you can get under it a bit too easily for me.
I want to try and push the boundaries of wedge for you for a little bit. So I noticed there's one of these things that you've put in not a wedge that I want to contend is the front of, what is that, Rusty, in the top right of that quadrant.
Top right, yep.
So this is about how much of the robot you need to consider, or how much of the sort of the object you need to consider for its wedginess. Right. So the interesting thing here is that you've got Behemoth, which I would say is clearly a scoop because it's a smooth transition as it goes, right? But the front of Rusty is a similar shape, but it's in panels, right? So I would make the argument that at the very least, the very leading edge of that, the first section, if you consider that in isolation, is a wedge. And I want to ask, does the fact that the section after it goes steeper and then steeper again, does that impact it for you?
There are a lot of factors at play here. First of all, I don't think I can call it a defensive wedge because it doesn't look sturdy enough. I think material does matter, and that was so flimsy that I think you have to consider it a part of a flipper rather than being anything defensive. And to me, it is quite important that a wedge either has a very distinct offensive purpose or a distinct defensive purpose, sometimes even both.
Is a doorstop not a wedge then, because it's not made of the right material?
Is a doorstop a combat robot?
I feel like you and I have come at this from slightly different points of view.
I think that was entirely likely and frankly necessary for the debate. I view that part of Rusty as a shoddily made scoop. It's basically a low poly Behemoth at that point.
Okay.
They haven't gone to the effort that the Behemoth team went to in terms of making a nice smooth transition there. I'm surprised that's a contentious one. I think Trolley Rage is probably the contentious one.
The thing is, I think we both agree on the fact that a wedge has a limited range of angles on the front, on the leading edge that are acceptable. And I think Trolley Rage is probably, I think it's right on the edge. Is it like 45, I would guess? And it's sort of hard to know. I sort of thought maybe the absolute most I'd go is 60 degrees on the front angle there. But I think even that's probably quite high. I could be persuaded to go back down to 45 there.
I'd argue that Terahertz's wedge is probably steeper than 45, probably nearer the 60 you're talking about. But I'd say it's still very clearly a defensive wedge.
I don't know. I don't think that's a wedge in the way that I've been thinking of wedges. I think it is too high. I think that's like a defensive sheet of metal that happens to be inclined, you know?
But I'd say it's inclined with the express purpose of deflecting blows rather than just tanking them. So something like Chomp's lower armour isn't angled at all, it's just there to try and take a hit by being thick and heavy and hard. Whereas if you look at, for example, the Carbide Terahertz fight from Series 8, you see very clearly that the wedge has the effect of making the blade ride up it.
So, for me, when I've been thinking about this, I've been very much thinking of it more in terms of the ability for a robot to, I guess, get under another one, right? Or an object to sort of like slide under something else. And I think terahertz is too high for that to be any good. So that's right on the boundary of sort of like wedginess, if you will. Like on your scatter plot, it would be on a low end of wedginess for me, just because of that leading angle.
I think the thing we're really learning here is that we need to work out what the axes are for this scatter plot. Got to make it happen now.
I've got another shape that I want to try you with, or a couple of other shapes I want to try you with.
Are any of them Gombox?
None of them are Gombox, no. So I was sort of considering, does any of it need to be flat, right? So so Razor's wedge is a very narrow strip of flat metal, really, and then the sides curve away gently. And if you take that and then I guess Apollo is like the low poly version of that with like a thin sort of wedgy bit in the middle, and Eruption has this as well, and then the sloped off sides. But then the sort of extreme version of this is a cone cut in half.
I was just trying to think of examples of robots like that. Do you remember in the old Robot Wars games there was that exact chassis?
That was their exact chassis, and yeah, that was a thing. Is that a wedge, or does it need to have like a flat section on the top of it?
That is the hardest edge case I think you could have come up with. My heart says no, but my brain says it has to be.
See, I settled on it not being a wedge at that point. I think for me it does need to have like a flat.
I can completely see why you have it that way, and I can get on board with it.
What I couldn't do is figure out how wide that had to be.
There's a golden ratio for this. Because
it's sort of like, obviously you can take this to absurd levels if you zoom in enough. Basically anything's flat, right? But like, sort of thinking, if you had like a centimetre wide flat section up an otherwise conical robot, is that a wedge?
What if it didn't start flat but got flattened out over the course of a fight? Does it become a wedge midway through? How many hits does that take?
Oh dear.
Well, the tricky thing there is that if, again, you low-polyed that and made it sort of a half of a tetrahedron, if it was that, I definitely wouldn't be calling that a wedge. I'm looking right now at a photo of Dominator 2, if you remember that robot. If not, Google it.
To DuckDuckGo.
Oh, of course, yeah. Check out that plasma nitrile-coated titanium.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. See, Dominator 2, got it. Reject advertising cookies, thank you. Ooh, that is an interesting robot. Yes, I remember this now.
So, if it didn't have the double wedge, I'd say it wasn't a wedge at all. But because it does have the double wedge, which kind of creates this invisible plane that something can ride up, I now want to call it a wedge.
I don't think that's a wedge. I don't think I could call that a wedge. I don't know what that is.
They called it a bi-wedge, which I definitely don't like, because I'd argue that on its own, one part of that isn't a wedge.
Yeah, if you just had a triangle, that's not like a triangular prism. Yeah, that's not a wedge on its own. I don't know what that is. I kind of like the idea of the invisible plane making it a wedge, because I can totally see where that makes sense in so many ways, but I don't think you could say that's a wedge.
This has been much harder than the drum argument. And also far less vitriolic.
I think because I've thought about it more. It actually got me thinking quite a lot about this. I've got one more shape, I guess, to go through quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take a sheet of metal, you make a right angle triangle out of it, and then put it so that it sort of like from the side would look like a wedge, right? That on its own, is that a wedge?
Absolutely categorically not, because it's essentially a 2D object.
So if you had... So I think we're going to run into the issue we've just sort of come across.
How thick is this material going to have to be to become a wedge? That's
that's not where I'm going. So now you have two of them, and they're like, I don't know, 10 centimeters apart or something, and then you've got, I guess, the invisible plane thing. So I think we both know where this is going to go. But is that a wedge?
I think it has the makings of a wedge.
Right.
I think it is a wedge in potentia.
So now, how many sheets of metal do you need to put between them, and how big a gap can you have between them for it to still be? If you had some, say, separated, like a bunch in a row, separated with a gap of a centimetre between them, is that a wedge?
Sounds to me like you're creating a set of wedgelets, mate.
And if you put half a centimetre between them, if they were all touching, would that be a wedge?
Yes. Anything more than the plank length between them, not a wedge. Set of wedgelets.
See, I think basically a comb of these triangles, I think I'd call that a wedge.
I think if someone actually came in with this, we'd need a new word for it.
If someone did that, I'd love it.
Basically, what I'm imagining right now is hair clippers.
Yeah.
You know, the little garden. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, but almost exactly that, yeah.
By that logic, if you attach like a strip of brush on the front of your robot, you could call that a wedge.
A strip of brush?
Hmm.
Oh, I see what you mean. Man.
Of the sweeping variety, for example.
Yeah, that's not a wedge. That's not a wedge.
Why? Not rigid enough?
I think so, but then I'm sort of thinking, if you had quite a stiff brush and then a whole bunch and they didn't give very much, would that be a wedge? If you had like a bunch of, oh man, you got me thinking of more. There's
a
now.
crossover point there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a point. I think more consideration and exploration will be required, I think.
I think this is going to get us through to episode 50. Yeah, I'm going to go away and do more thinking on this. I think I need more examples and I need to work out what this scatter plot is going to be. But one thing I can guarantee is that this is not going to be as easy to define as the drum, because my drum definition is perfect no matter what anyone else says. So we shall leave that be for the time being, shall we?
I think so.
Quick bit of Tesla news then. Did you know, Sam, that somewhere in the world, on a day in the past week, a car caught fire? And that was news. That was top 10 most read of the BBC news website. A car catching fire. It's unheard of. It's never happened before. The whole world is stunned.
To be fair, though, I feel like battery fires are somewhat more scary than a petrol fire, I think. But maybe not.
Scary in a different way, I'd
both
say.
Pretty scary. I guess the battery fire is more scary in that it's in that we see it less, and therefore anything that's unusual is scary.
And I think, the fumes in particular are more worrying than those from, say, a petrol or diesel fire. Not that either are good.
It's fine. Breathe in petrol fumes, it's fine.
It's a great high, I'm sure. Just say no to diesel. Part of me does say that batteries are slightly scarier, purely because in the last week I've handled both petrol and a swollen lithium polymer battery, and I was way more scared of the battery. But that's because that could have just gone up any time, whereas the petrol I have to do something stupid with.
I wouldn't put it past you.
Nor would I. Not at all. No, the media coverage that this got does make me wonder if a tiny bit of Elon's sort of complex about the media is slightly valid. This is another thing to do with a Tesla that has been blown all out of proportion. Do you really think it is just people being scared of what they don't understand with the batteries?
I think that is probably quite a big part of it. I mean, the news is looking for stuff that people are going to click on, and people are going to click on the new technology that doesn't work. I think that's quite an enticing story, I think. And because humans don't like change. I think just in general, humans resist change in a lot of ways. Not always, but in a lot of ways. And, we're fine with having, cars powered by explosions that kill tens of thousands of people every year, because we've had cars powered by explosions that kill tens of thousands of people every year for a long time. And because it's not always been that way, but for a lot of people, it's sort of functionally always been that way, and therefore it's fine. Whereas when you sort of bring in the new thing, it's sort of like, oh man, this changes everything, and the dynamics of what's safe and all that kind of stuff changes and stuff. And I don't know, people just don't like change.
I suppose there is a slight practical aspect to it as well, in terms of you must have to fight a fire on an electric vehicle very differently to fighting a conventional engine that's on fire.
I'd have thought so, yeah.
And I suppose containment procedures are different, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem like enough to be getting this riled up about it.
Well, you clicked on the news link and now we're talking about it, so I think the BBC have done their job.
Oh no, okay, I'm not going to link to this in the show notes then, just to show them, deny them potentially a few hundred clicks, which they really wouldn't care about. Okay, then I'll fuel the fire of something else then. That didn't work at all.
Do you want to try that again?
If I was about to talk about Clashbots and I could have said I'm going to fan the flames of the dumpster fire that is Clashbots, that would have worked. But I'm going to talk about This Is Fighting Robots, and that's not terrible. Although I feel like, oh, you actually watched... Did you end up watching the episode that I said you might enjoy? That's an answer in itself.
I forgot. I forgot that you mentioned it.
Well, I'm going to give spoilers now anyway, so it's your loss.
I think I deserve that, yeah.
This Is Fighting Robots is over. We must say congratulations to Team Carbide, who won it all.
Well done.
Team Tantia coming in second, but most importantly, our heroes. By far the greatest team in China. Xhaka once again coming in the top 3. second place in King of Bots, third place in This Is Fighting Robots.
The team name isn't enough for me to know who you're talking about.
Chiang Jinla. Well, the ones that came second in King of Bots.
Well, you need to be explicit and clear. I remember robots, not teams.
No, I'm going to say it again. There are now battle-only edits out. If you look up Dr. Neroli on Reddit, there's links there. I won't share them in the show notes because it creates issues with them getting taken down. I would highly, highly recommend taking a look at the fights-only versions because there were some excellent matches. The editing of them is still a bit naff, but there's some really good action in there that's well worth looking back over and some amazing machines.
Okay, I will probably not binge it at some point.
I know you won't. It's more the audience, I'm thinking, people that might be open to these new ideas.
Look, I just started playing Skyrim recently, and that's it.
I've also recently picked up Fortnite. I don't even enjoy it, but I can't stop playing it. It's a bad situational round.
Oh, dear.
I'm like 50 games in and I've got maybe 5 kills. Although I have come second 3 times because bush camping. Anyway, BattleBots, let's move on.
Okay. So where do you want to begin with BattleBots then?
Well, should we begin with the first fight of the episode? Or should we begin with the intro sequence that I've forgotten what happened in?
Was this the one with a gag about Wi-Fi and saw blades?
It may well have been.
Cutting up the router. Well, that was the gag.
The gag was made. Reality versus Sawblaze.
Yeah. This is the first time we've seen reality. And I think the reality of not having a feeder wedge really hit them in the face.
Yes. It's a machine that I really like the look of. It's really compact and really well armoured. But the lack of a wedge against a robot like Sawblaze was a bit of a killer for them.
Yeah.
They have explained why they don't have one. They're already a 4-wheel drive machine, and to make a good wedge on a 4-wheel drive machine is already quite difficult. To then get that to work effectively on an arena that's as broken up as BattleBots is, ever since session 1 of filming, they felt it was going to be more trouble than it was a benefit to them. I'd still argue that, maybe at least running a couple of forks might help them in a lot of other fights, but I don't think it would have helped here.
It's hard to know.
I mean, they have a touch more experience than either of us, but I'd like to think that we can just tell them what to do anyway.
Look, that is one of the core pillars of this podcast is us telling people who build robots how to build robots.
It is the key guiding principle of Spinnerproof. We don't know what we're doing, but you should do things our way.
I like how we say this despite having... we've been claiming to build ant-wakes for basically as long as we've been doing this.
Well, I mean, you've built more of one than I have. I have you know that once I'm away on summer work, I will be completing this ant-wake.
Okay.
Possibly in your flat, using your tools.
Brilliant. Well, I'm glad you told me now.
Yeah, it's fair warning, Something that was kind of alluded to in the broadcast but not really spoken about properly is the weapon on Reality, which, for the record, not a drum, dual discs. They're actually using some kind of hub motor for it, which means that the motor assembly is essentially inside that... Almost said it. Inside the weapon.
It's inside the what now?
Inside the weapon.
Inside the weapon. What is that weapon exactly?
Well, specifically, it's inside the shaft joining the 2 discs. The extremely thick axle.
It's a mighty thick shaft.
Oh, no, there's a title.
Oh, no! What have I done?
I mean, you get final say because you're the person that types it in, so, No, I just really want to know what the advantage of doing that is, because it seems to me like it's potentially quite a fragile setup to have your motor inside your weapon. I know it's quite common at lower weights, but for a heavyweight, I think this is possibly the first time it's been done. I imagine it's simply a bit more compact, because you're not housing your motor in your body, you're housing it in the weapon that would be dead space anyway. So I can kind of see that. But yeah, I just really want to know what the advantages and disadvantages are. So if anyone out there knows, let us know.
I would guess that it's almost entirely the space-saving elements, and I'd also think that there's maybe a hint of not having like some kind of drive belt or chain or complicated cog system that goes from a motor to the drum. Not that that's ever a particularly big weak spot, but I think some robots do have that problem.
Yeah, I mean, some spinners, specifically sort of discs more than drums or conjoined discs, do have quite vulnerable sort of pulley things. I've forgotten the word there. You know what I mean.
Yeah, drive belt.
Yeah, actual drums don't seem to struggle with it as much, but I think there's a lot of room for redundancy with a drum or a dual disc. I'm being so careful not to call this a drum. It's very hard work.
I think that's telling you something, which is that this is a drum.
It's just a snappier word that would make my life easier, but truth matters, and I'm very committed to being truthful.
Oh dear.
But yeah, I'd like to learn more about that, so if anyone can educate me, I'll be very grateful. Saw blades, on the other hand, we've seen it before. We've seen that it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite dangerous.
Yeah, this was almost another almost ideal fight for a saw again, with a robot that couldn't really do much damage to them, and then saw blades in control basically the whole time. Their only Achilles heel here was their tendency to wheelie when they drive forwards. But I think if they didn't do that, I'm not sure that Reality would ever have got a hit. But the damage that saw blades did, you have to think that if they had a little bit more time, or if the armor was a little bit thinner, they would have hit something fragile inside of Reality there.
Well, the fight report that they've given showed 2 places where a couple more millimeters would probably have gotten the KO. So there was one point where they got about halfway through some kind of wiring, and another point where they started grazing the battery compartment. So either of those, if they just got that little bit deeper, they would probably have had a very spectacular KO on their hands.
I mean, that's really shown that a KO from a saw is possible, and now that is the only thing I want to see.
Well, I mean, we kind of had it last season. Red Devil versus Witch Doctor.
Yeah.
I want to see that as much as possible. You've mentioned the wheeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree that without that, they would have had this fight completely. They wouldn't have taken that damage to the middle fork that kind of ruined their ground clearance for the final part of the fight. I'm trying to wonder if there's any way that they can actually stop that from happening. Because it's clearly just a question of drive power and a bit of weight distribution making that happen. And they don't really want to be driving around with the saw up, because that's going to be wobbling around a lot. It's not going to do much for their control. It would also look a bit stupid, and it would raise their centre of gravity. They probably don't want to put a wheelie bar on it, because at that point, you're sort of looking to potentially get yourself high-centred in places, which wouldn't happen with their current design. And they can't just dial down the drive, because they need that to push opponents into the wall to get the pin, to get the saw to work. So part of me feels like it's something they've just got to put up with.
I was gonna suggest like a wheelie bar or something at the back of it, like a spring-loaded wheel or something that just puts a bit of pressure to sort of keep it pushed forwards. The other thought that I've just had is magnetism, but I don't know. I can't remember how I suspect the floor of the BattleBots arena is not sufficiently magnetic for that to work. But I don't know how much you'd need to stop the wheeling.
So I know that teams have tried to use magnets and found it difficult because there's quite a thick layer of paint over it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible. I don't know what kind of distance you need with the really strong neodymium magnets to actually get enough pull.
Yeah, and I don't know how much pull you'd need on the front. If you imagine having like magnets basically at the front of their robot, of the dustbin thingy, whatever. Like, I think that would dustpan. You know what I mean?
Dustbin. Would a dustbin be a wedge?
I think not. But I think if you had like magnets on the front of each of those points there, I'm not sure how much magnetic force you would need for that to sort of like prevent, or at the very least sort of reduce all but the most aggressive accelerations, or not reduce accelerations, but you know what I mean, like prevent it from lifting up on all but the most aggressive of accelerations.
Make wheelies not wheelie anymore.
Yeah.
Make them wheelie unlikely.
Oh my god.
Come on, you got to be a bit proud of me.
I mean, well,
taking a leaf out of your book there.
I forced in wheel jokes, and you've been really upset with me.
Yeah, and now I'm making a concession to your style of humour.
Well, I really appreciate it.
It's wheelie kind. Wheelie. My favourite part of this fight, and it came up a couple of times.
Sorry. We'll need to move on now.
Oh, no. Something I greatly enjoyed was seeing the cuts that Sawblaze made in reality continue to glow after they'd driven away for a couple of seconds.
Oh, that was amazing. That was just beautiful.
Friction saws are just my favourite thing now. I want one even though I've got nothing to cut. I'll just go around cutting stuff that I don't need.
It's still not as good as a good crusher, but I mean, yeah, it's pretty cool.
I mean, There's a chance we'll still get some good crushing this season, although it's looking very unlikely.
Increasingly unlikely, yeah.
I think we do have to give credit to reality for a lot of their driving in this match. The fact they've managed to land a couple of hits, the fact they've not got as cut up as they maybe could have, I think is a real testament to the way they drove. And it looks like a really manoeuvrable and really nippy machine, which up against an opponent that isn't Sawblaze will count for a lot.
Yeah.
What I can't think is what sort of matchups would really suit them, especially without the wedge.
I don't know. Something like Shredderator, maybe?
I suppose in its new configuration, yeah, I could see that working for them.
Yeah.
But any flippers they're going to have trouble with. Most verticals they're going to have trouble with because most of them have got some kind of feeder wedge.
I was going to say if they could get around the side of Bronco, but then Bronco have got the ridiculous feathers, so...
Oh, yeah, we'll get to that.
So probably not, yeah. They could probably do quite well against Sub-Zero, I'd have thought, if they can get around the side of that.
I mean, anyone could do well against Sub-Zero.
It's got the nice sort of like vertical high sides that would you'd hopefully get a good bite on if you just ram them from the side. But yeah,
Sub-Zero is a boat with a flipper attached on the front.
I sense that you don't like Sub-Zero very much.
Again, we'll get there.
We will.
So, speaking of crushers, as we were at the point I should have made this segue, Monsoon versus Petunia.
Yes, this was an exciting fight, wasn't it?
Oh, this had everything. Everything and more. Two robots coming in on the back of wins. Okay, they both went to the judges, but they were fairly dominant in those fights. Also, kind of a matchup that Tom will have been a little bit worried about, given what happened last time he fought a crusher. Although this time he's come in with a robot that can actually turn, which probably helps quite a lot. As opposed to the old Tauron.
Yeah. So I'm distracted by a particular note, right? So I was typing notes in a bit of a rush, and I think autocorrect has done something here. I have a note that just reads Bushy Nashua, which I think was Bashy Bashy.
I think Bushy Nashua is better. Was this a Bashy Bashy, really?
I think after Monsoon's weapon went.
Yeah, but it's a Bashy Bashy where one of the robots is already on fire.
This is true. It was a bit Bashy Bashy, but yeah, not a classic Bashy Bashy.
It had potential to be Bashy Bashy, except there was hydraulic fluid all over the floor and no one could drive properly.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shame. I think they had both wheel spinning at the end of that.
Mm.
What do you think's wrong with Monsoon's weapon? What happened with it this time?
Okay, so their first failure, I believe, was to do with the weapon belt starting to slip because they sort of got a bite on Red Devil that sort of trapped part of Red Devil between the frame and the bar and stopped it dead, which isn't a good situation for a spinner.
No.
This time around, they smacked Petunia so hard that they bent their own weapon axle, which is something like 30mm grade 5 titanium.
Wow.
Which is just ridiculous.
That is a hefty bar, blimey, or a hefty weapon.
Yeah, and that's a hefty blow to damage it.
Yeah, wow.
We questioned where they were in terms of energy. I think that's kind of answered the question, hasn't it?
I think they're pretty definitively up there.
Yeah. And a robot like Petunia is built to take some blows. It certainly showed that it could handle horizontal blows. But it's taken, 3-4 hits to completely dismantle it? Especially that one from behind that got into the hydraulic system. That just tore a massive gash. It was almost as good as the Lightspeed ramming scene from Star Wars. It was that effective.
Yeah, it was. There's like a perfect gash in the back of their robot afterwards. It's, I presume, about the width of Monsoon's weapon there. It's just amazing to see.
You almost expected to see the edges of it glowing again, didn't you?
Or maybe a little person running out of that doorway.
Oh, God.
No, I can't do it anymore. Don't make me fight.
For some reason, I'm now imagining that every single machine is actually crewed by tiny people.
There's tiny, like, humanoid mice in my head, wearing suits.
Oh, you've kind of got back to Hitchhiker's Guide there. Super intelligent mice getting themselves killed in robot combat. It wouldn't really make sense, would it?
No, but yet somehow it would.
Yeah, you have got me to my one down point of the episode. I thought that was a great little reference from the Monsoon team. However, problem number one, Chris and Kenny seem really keen on making sure that everyone knows what they just referenced when they reference something. We had that with Zoolander a second before.
Oh god, that was so annoying. Well, that was less annoying than them explaining someone else's reference, but both very annoying.
Oh, it gets worse. Did you catch the fact that Chris called himself and Kenny movie nerds for getting a book reference?
Hitchhiker's Guide is also a film, and what made me laugh more though is that they called themselves Movie Nerd, having just said that it's a reference, I think. They weren't even like conclusively saying this is a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide. It was like, I think that's a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide. Aren't we movie nerds? No, you're not.
I kind of found myself doing a bit of gatekeeping when I heard that, going, I bet they haven't even read the book where that reference starts to make sense. That's a reference that takes 4 books to pay off.
We shouldn't be so harsh, but it is annoying.
Yeah, we should. It's kind of the point of what we do here.
It is annoying when they explain references.
References are better unexplained. That's just a fact. The whole point of a reference is that you're in a little exclusive club of people that understand what was just said. Often they're not that little or exclusive, but they feel it.
I don't know, man. When you get a good reference to something really small that no one gets.
Oh, I'm sure you've done it to me multiple times over the course of this podcast. There'll be stuff that you've just said and I've not reacted to.
Never.
We also had a bit of fun with the subtitling this episode, which I'm going to guess you didn't notice while we're talking about subtle references that aren't subtle at all.
Oh, was this someone subtitling what someone said and then just question marks for the other guy? I did spot that, yeah.
Oh, well done. Good for you.
I pay attention sometimes.
Don't know why you bother, really. This fight could have gone a very different way at 2 points. First of all, I think there were genuine opportunities for Petunia to get a really good crush on the body of Monsoon. And were they a bit faster with the weapon, I think they could have basically taken them out in the first 30 seconds if they got a good hit on something.
Yeah.
Second of all, we've got the whole situation where it looked like it was going to be a double knockout. Now, according to people who were there, that may not have been the most honest representation of what went on. But there was a very real danger that had Petunia not got high-centred, they would have been mobile and Monsoon not, purely because they were stuck on a slick of basically Petunia's blood.
Yeah, that would have been a disappointing result.
It kind of begs the question of whether at some point there needs to be some system of basically giving machines a pass if they get stuck in that manner. The only reason they've got stuck like that is the fact that they eviscerated the back end of their opponent. It'd be really harsh for a robot to lose because of that. It hasn't happened here, and that's great, but you have to feel that it could at some point. If anything, it probably will at some point.
What would that system be, though? I think you're going to run into the issues that we sort of addressed a little bit last time around, I guess it's not like fully restarting a fight, but I think you might sort of run into little bits of that. And it's sort of like, how do you make a call that it was like an unfair, I guess, knockout?
I mean, there's 2 things I'd like to see in this situation. Either a physical unsticking of the robot. You know, for example, I feel like the way Minotaur lost that tombstone fight, I don't think that should be a loss. I think there should be a system for getting people off of that sort of thing.
Like, for example, a robot that's controlled by the producers that can come and free other robots.
That could work. And of course, there is an argument there that if you make something like a flipper or a hammer a slightly less meta design, you have the ability to get off of that other machines don't.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something you want to keep as an advantage. I don't really see that, but I can understand that argument. But to me, it's just an unsatisfying end. And if you can't free a robot manually and get the fight going from the point where it stopped, I feel like it should at least then go to a judge's decision.
Would it not have gone to, if they'd both been stopped at the same time, would that not have gone to a judge's?
Oh yeah, it would. I'm not talking about the double knockout situation. I realise this is probably quite confusingly set up by me. I'm talking more about issues of robots getting stuck in general. Although in this case, they were kind of both stuck, so I suppose it would still have gone that way, but yeah.
So what if there was one robot that was stuck and then didn't get freed? You'd give, so like in the Tombstone Minotaur case, I nearly did it. You'd give that to judges, would you?
Yeah, or I mean, I'd prefer to just unstick the robot and get it going again.
Yeah.
This is something we get at robo games quite a lot as well, where robots will get stuck under the wall and just get counted out for it.
Well, the answer there is obvious. Don't drive into the wall.
I knew you'd say something like that. It's great for wall memes. I love a wall meme, but I'd rather see fights go to a satisfying conclusion.
You're saying that a wall ending is not satisfying?
I mean, it's satisfying if you've slammed your opponent into the wall and got them stuck under it. But if they've just got stuck because they were too good at making a really low wedge or fork...
I like how you frame that in a positive way. If they got stuck at the wall because they're too bad at driving to avoid the wall, is how I would have phrased that.
Well, no, if you're slamming an opponent into the wall and you end up underneath them and going in as well, I think that... I mean, you're technically right. That's the problem here. You're not wrong. You're just using being right the wrong way.
That's the best kind of correct.
You're not coming to the same conclusion I'm coming to, and that's a problem. I don't like wall endings. There, no. I said it. I've courted more controversy.
Yeah. I think despite my arguments here, I feel like I'm probably not a fan of them as well, but there you go.
You got to double down.
I just don't know what you can do about them that's fair. That's the thing.
Well, unstick.
No, but you know, it wouldn't work. You could not have another robot in the arena that was controlled by the production that could go in free robots. That just it wouldn't
impossible.
Work. It's a silly idea. I don't know why we even keep floating it. It's silly.
Could always have a crane drone.
That
kind of like Mario Kart. You fall off the edge and the crane drone gets you back.
That would be sick. That would be awesome.
How great would that Bronco Bombshell fight have been if Bronco just got lifted back into the arena by a cloud and it carried on?
Bombshell.
Ideally with a fishing rod.
Yeah.
Did I say the wrong robot?
You did. You said exactly
the
wrong robot.
Fix it in post.
No.
Anything more on that fight now that I've gone on a massive tangent?
No, I don't think so.
Well then, shall we move on to another fight?
Sub-Zero versus Captain Shredderator.
I just need us to capture this sound, okay? That is my facepalm sound. I am not happy with this fight. I also now have a slightly stingy face, because I did that way harder than I should have, just for the purposes of audio. So here we've got two robots which completely failed to impress in their first outings, which have undergone major repairs and changes. Sub-Zero got absolutely eviscerated by Huge and has been largely rebuilt in armour terms. They've got their big, thick back end to lead with. Shredderator's gone back to the old school shell design. I imagine they've probably gone back to some more old school electronics potentially as well that actually work, given the teething problems they had. I mean, it works as a fight. A fight took place. It's better than Endgame Shredderator, I suppose.
I think this was a good fight right until it wasn't. Right until the end when Shredderator just kind of stopped. And that was like, I really felt for the guy there, because it's like, that's just so rubbish to go through all of that and to be like back on form, dominating this fight, and then suddenly, poof, gone. And you're conceding a match to Sub-Zero of all things. So it's like, yeah, it's disappointing. But them's the rules, so what can you do?
If I'm going to be objective about it, I have to concede that Sub-Zero have won this fight through good strategy and a robust build. And they are two things that are commendable and good and that I love in a lot of other machines. But I can't look past the fact that this was just so harsh on Shredderator. They really deserved the win.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help. I already have a slight bias against Sub-Zero. I'm fairly sure I liked it last season, just because they were really up against it and had a rough time. But this time around, I've just not taken a shine to it at all.
Yeah, it's a very like middle of the pack robot for me. I think it's just sort of a bit meh. I think I don't have particularly negative feelings towards it, but not overly positive ones either. And yeah, I mean, in this fight, it was like that was all Shredderators, really.
It's the kind of robot I should like, because it goes against the meta, and it brings a weapon type that we don't see enough of. I really should like it.
Shockingly, you're being inconsistent about this.
I know, it's never happened before.
Do we know what went wrong with Captain Shredderator?
No, I think they have answered that question. I just didn't look far enough through their AMA to find out, because I lack thoroughness, and I'm still bitter about this fight. Mostly part 2.
Yeah, it's a shame.
I feel like I'd have been a lot happier with Sub-Zero winning this if they'd actually tried to use their weapon at any point.
It did go off.
Yeah, while they were backing into their opponent.
I know. Do you think that's because they were pressing the button? Or do you think that was because the big hit from Shredderator was causing something in there to make it fire?
I'd like to think it was option 2. I feel like it's option 1 for no reason. Maybe they were trying to class it as aggression in case it went to the judges. Yep, we used our weapon. It was nowhere near our opponent, but we used it. Boy, did it get used.
I mean, it was so perfectly timed with exactly when they took their hits from Shredderator. Because when I was watching it, I was thinking, is that being activated by Shredderator?
What if they were trying to jump over Shredderator? Then I'd be okay with it.
If they'd done it, I could tell you how this conversation would have gone down. You'd have been all over it, being like, it was amazing, fantastic driving, and I would have told you they got lucky. But that would have been really, really awesome.
A proper body slam, a belly flop almost.
I'm not sure it would do anything, but that would be hilarious.
Oh, it would just get their underside damaged because they're landing still on teeth if they come down on that part of Shredderator.
Yeah.
Well, this version of it anyway. But yeah, it would be a hell of a moment. That'd be trailer material right there.
Yeah. It would. More wrestling moves in combat robotics. That'd be great.
I suppose the final issue I have with it is the fact they celebrated that win. That's like cheering a double fault in tennis.
Well, of course they're going to cheer it. They won.
Yeah, they, as I say, objectively they did earn that win by being robust and being tactical. It's just that I don't like it, so I'm being unnecessarily harsh. I'm a terrible person.
That you are.
Anything else to say on that before we get on to a thrilling fight that gave us everything we wanted and more?
I think it's time, isn't it, to do Chomp versus Warrior Dragon.
I mean, we could not. That is an option.
No, I've thought too much about this to not do it.
Okay, let's just prepare for the vitriol involved in any discussion of this fight. Let's just acknowledge that we may regret addressing any of this.
So, I'm just going to go, okay? Are you ready?
Do it.
So this went to a judge's decision, and to everyone's surprise, it was a split decision. One of the things that you mentioned a couple of episodes ago, I think, was about how often we should expect to see split decisions. And I think the point you made was that if the rules are being applied correctly and like consistently, then we'll never get a split decision. And if we get lots of split decisions, it's kind of like the judges either don't know what they're doing or the rules are not specific enough about what's going on. And so when we get a split decision, I think we both try and look at the fight and try and understand why that judge gave it the way they did. And in earlier cases, we've said, well, one of these guys is like competed and drives robots, and he knows how hard it would be to control that particular robot, and that's why maybe he gave it to them, and that kind of thing. And I think that's fair enough. And I think we're always going to get some split decisions here. And the first time I watched this fight, it got to the end, and it's like, well, that is Warrior Dragons all over. Like, I'm not overly happy with the way that they won, just because I like Chomp a lot, but it was clearly their fight. They won that unequivocally, and then it was a split decision. I'm like, what on earth is going on here? So it's sort of like, so I've sort of gone back and I've sort of tried to understand what Naomi saw in this fight that we didn't. I'm trying to sort of understand, try and sort of like come at this from a point of view that we're watching an edited version of this fight, and we weren't there live. So there might be other stuff that we're just not seeing that they all had access to. I'm not entirely convinced that was the case. And the only thing I can think of, and I don't think this is enough to swing it, but the only thing I can think of is that Warrior Dragon's weapons were broken, and maybe you can make an argument that they were broken by Chomp. I don't think they were, but that's the only thing I can think of that would give Chomp nearly enough points. And even then, it's like, that's not enough points. So it's like,
It's still a 3-2 win for Warrior Dragon at that point, isn't it?
yeah. So the only thing I'm left with, which is kind of, I don't like saying it, but the only thing I'm left with is there's an element of favoritism, I think. And I can totally see how this happens, right? Because I really like Chomp, and I really like the team. I love that Zoe like brought someone from the audience in, a small thing, but I love the fact she's wearing ear protection because hearing is important and you should protect it. I think so. Massive thumbs up there.
Points for safety in your rulebook.
Yeah, well, genuinely though, like the thing is, this is just a personal. I have problems with certain noises, and one of those noises is very high-pitched ringing. And if you've ever come across a thing called tinnitus, you'll be familiar with high-pitched ringing. And so I live in constant fear of this. Yes, what? I got that.
Good.
So,
because that could have seemed really offensive.
And then the other thing that I like about Chomp is obviously just the technology that they bring in. And, it's not necessarily the world's most effective thing, but sometimes it is effective. And I think it's cool that they're trying. I do appreciate that they're pushing the boundaries. So there's a lot about Chomp that I really like. And then this is all magnified by the way that Warrior Dragon won. And I want to commend Warrior Dragon here as like, this is very tactical, very efficient driving to win that fight. And they did nothing wrong. But because I like Chomp, and because they're doing things like putting themselves right under where they know Chomp is going to self-right, which is, again, absolutely valid, great tactics, it's still frustrating because I want to see Chomp do well. And it's hard to watch a robot that you really like not be allowed to do well. So with all that in mind, I can sort of totally see that you'd sort of like want, with everything you have, to try and give it to Chomp. But when you're judging, you've got to be impartial. And I can't think of a within the rules reason to give that to Chomp. I think that was just outright bad judging.
I mean, I think I've come up with a justification for that decision. I don't agree with it, but I think I've got a way that it would make sense to give it that way. And I'll go through that in a second, but I want to address a very specific bit of this favouritism argument, which is that there were a lot of people who were way, way, way too fast to jump on this as a sexism issue. And that, as a thing in the community, is not a thing that we ever want to get into. But suffice to say that there have been plenty of questionable decisions made during this season so far, and at no point has anybody ever made those personal about anything about the judge until this one. And I'm not okay with that. If we're willing to write off other people's decisions as just dodgy decisions that happen when you judge, we need to do the same with this one, which is exactly how I feel about it. I think it's a dodgy decision. I wouldn't even say there's necessarily an element of favouritism with it. I think people see fights slightly differently. You know, when you hear hooves, you've got to think horses, not zebras. It's just a bad call. There doesn't have to be anything more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I always, like I said, was trying to do, of sort of try and view the fight through other eyes and just try and understand what they saw. I can't get there. I'd love it if there was an explanation given by Naomi, but I don't know that we're ever going to get it.
I mean, I think I can give an explanation for her. When I first saw it, I was with everyone else. I could not imagine any conceivable way in which Chomp had won that fight. And that is until someone on Reddit posted up a slow motion gif of Chomp getting a hammer blow on the flipper that completely buckles it. Now, apparently that came at a point in the fight where the flipper already wasn't working, but I still class that as quite major damage because it's completely ruined the ground clearance of Warrior Dragon. It's got rid of the wedge that they were using to get in underneath. I think that is that there is a way you could view the fight where that is the major damage of the fight. And in that respect, I can see how any of the judges could potentially have given Chomp both damage points based on that. Because it's really hard to see that Warrior Dragon actually did any damage to them. It used the flipper, and I don't quite know how flipping an opponent is viewed within the rules. In a lot of tournaments, flipping an opponent is classed as damage, but in BattleBots, I believe it isn't. Because BattleBots wants explosions and sparks, not robots getting tipped on their side. So they have judging criteria that reward damaging robots. So I can understand how you might well give Chomp both points for damage. Personally, if I'm the judge, best case scenario, I'm splitting it, but I can see how you'd give them both. That then leaves 4 more points on the table. Sorry, 3 more points on the table. Control, absolutely 100% has to go to Warrior Dragon. No question whatsoever. They have all the control in that fight. They've got their flipper in multiple times, got flips in, they've positioned themselves well to hamper the self-righting. Strategy in the same respect has to go to Warrior Dragon, if only for stopping them self-righting. Easy. Aggression is another one that you could class as going either way. I personally would want to give it to Warrior Dragon because they've used their flipper multiple times and they've got in with the sort of terrible grindy ring spinner that doesn't really seem to do very much. But again, because they've lost the weapons partway through, I can see an argument where Chomp therefore wins aggression purely by virtue of having had longer in the fight to gain those points. You know, they have flailed around with the hammer a few times. They've not connected very often, but they've been aggressive with it when they've been on their wheels. So I'm assuming that in giving them the decision, Naomi has classed that damage to the flipper as the only real damage of the fight, and given aggression to Chomp. That's the only way I can see it being. I don't agree with it, but I think I can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's sort of the closest there is to an understanding of what's going on. Like I said, I think the only way I could see it happening was that if you sort of because this is one of the things that makes this hard. I think because there isn't any obvious damage in this fight. Really, neither robot comes out massively broken. And like on first watch, I sort of took all the damage that was done to Warrior Dragon as just damage they did to themselves by virtue of their design. I didn't see that as Chomp having done the damage. But yeah, I mean,
I mean, I'll try and find that GIF and put it in the show notes because it is a really good hit from Chomp.
yeah, that would be a good thing to see.
I mean, Chomp has an issue in itself where, this is a judged sport and you have to some degree, impress judges. Chomp's flamethrower made it really difficult to realise that they got that hit. Without the flamethrower, everyone would have seen that they scored a really good hit there, but because there were flames everywhere, it's easily missed. And I think that is a tactical oversight on their part. It puts on a good show, but if they are out to win fights, you need to make sure that you get credit for everything you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an issue that hammers have in general, really, or flippers. The damage they do is invisible, which means if it goes to the judges, you're already at a slight disadvantage. And you're making it worse for yourself by obscuring the moments when you are effective.
Yeah. It's hard. I think it's a hard thing to judge. Not necessarily this particular fight, but just in general. I think the sport is a hard thing to judge when you get to
judging
these,
must be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, especially when you get to these sort of closer decisions and stuff.
I'd love to know how much opportunity the judges have to rewatch fights as well. Because again, that hit was really hard to see. Did they even realise that they'd done it? Have they had a chance to view all of those angles? Is there a team of people there feeding them the pertinent replays, or have they just got to watch a single angle of all of it? There's lots of unanswered questions there.
I would guess that they don't get a lot of rewatching just because of the rest of the recording schedule that we sort of know about. It sort of seems to be like quite quick and fast paced. So like I wouldn't have thought they have a lot of time. Maybe they have more than we think. If maybe they can be judging while they're kind of resetting the arena for something else. I don't know.
I think even without answers to those questions, as a fan, okay, be angry in the moment if you want to. But I think once you've had that chance to step back, you have to realise that they have got a harder time watching that fight than you have. You've seen a nice, cleanly edited version of it on TV, which may or may not be a fair reflection of reality. They've had to see it in that situation under pressure. Mistakes are going to happen. Weird perceptions of things are going to happen.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think you just got to remember, it's only game.
Oh no, it's more than a game. It's more important than that. I will never let anyone say it's only a game to me.
Right, do you want to talk about the robots themselves?
I was going to say, we should actually talk about the machines and the fight. Should we start with Warrior Dragon as by far the less interesting machine? Just get it out the way.
I mean, has anything really changed with this robot since the last time we saw it?
Seemingly not, no. It's still a spring-powered flipper that everyone says is powered by the flywheel, when I'm fairly sure the flywheel just retracts it.
Well, it's getting its energy from the flywheel.
Technically, yes, I'll grant that. But I wouldn't call it flywheel-powered in that sense. It's flywheel... Actually, yeah, it's probably flywheel-powered, isn't it? There's no better phrase for it. I think that instead of describing this weapon, you should just have to provide a full technical diagram to the person who wants to know. That is the only correct way of communicating how this weapon works. Assuming it even works how I think it does, it might be properly flywheel powered. I don't know. It might just be teeth engaging with a lever that makes the thing go pop. I don't know. I just think it's a spring-powered thing.
That's how I'd always assumed it worked, but then they did mention springs a couple of times in the commentary. Not that the commentary is the world's most accurate source of information for these things, but they did mention it, so...
It's better than it used to be, isn't it?
Yep.
Chomp, however, a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. So they've got the even crazier automation and the fancy self-writing, I think, are the two most obvious changes here.
Two things which entirely failed to work in this fight.
Yeah. So I did read a post that these guys put up on Facebook, and they were sort of like not quite sure why they didn't work. I initially thought that Warrior Dragon was just too low for them to track, but I mean they reckon that they can track things that are that low, and that they did at times do that tracking. I'm not sure when in the fight they did it, but but yeah, it's a shame that they didn't work, and the self-writing is just too slow.
I think they're really good ideas. They are things that you can test in the workshop, but the real learning is going to happen in battle. And this battle was their learning. I think, I fully imagine that they will come back into the next fight much, much stronger. And they still have what makes Chomp Chomp, which is the ridiculous weapon power. It is a robot which is built purely around making that hammer hit as hard as possible. You know, the body shape is ridiculous. It can't stay on its wheels. Everything is about optimizing the power of that weapon. And boy, do I respect that.
It is cool. I'm struggling to see the utility. So I just want to go back to like the automated self-writing, which I'm struggling to sort of see the utility of, because that seems like one of the things that would be better for a human to be doing. I don't know why they wanted to make the thing automatically self-write.
I think part of the automatic self-writing is that it resets the hammer to a certain position before activating the self-writer. I think that's the actual automated bit. If it was just pressing a button to make one of those pistons come out, I'd say, yeah, that's better off human-controlled. But if it is a kind of compound process, I can understand why you'd want that to be predictable. In the end, it's worked against them. As they said in that post you were talking about, they wanted reliable self-writing, they wanted predictable self-writing, and it just made it really easy for an opponent to predict where they'd be, which works against them. I think Chomp also has a reputation to maintain as the semi-autonomous bot, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're gonna be, I guess, more autonomous every time they fight, I suppose, or every sort of like series they fight in.
What I'd really love is some reliable visual indication of when the autonomy is in use. Just as a televisual thing, I'd love to know. It would really give the game away to an opponent. It wouldn't be very good competitively, but as a viewer, I really want to know who's doing the work at every moment.
I mean, the other thing you could do, I mean, this would require a lot more coordination between the team and production and stuff, but you could almost sort of like give production logs of when the thing was done, so they could do some kind of on-screen graphic maybe, but that would be presumably a lot of extra work that they may or may not want to do.
Would it be a lot of extra work? I feel like there's a way of making that process probably quite streamlined if you want to. It's just a bit of start-up work, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if they put the time in, because you can do I don't know what they use to edit, but I know that in like the Adobe stuff in Premiere and After Effects and stuff, you can do like scripting stuff and you can automate things in there. So you could probably write some kind of script in those products, in either of those products, that will take in, like I said, like just a data log from the Chomp team and then puts the graphics on in the appropriate places. I don't know, but I don't know if you could do that with all editing software. I'd sort of guess that there's some level of automation in all of it, because if you have professional grade software, you need to automate it somehow. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it could be done. I think you're right though, that probably the majority of the effort is just like a start-up effort, and then after that it'd be quite easy to keep doing.
Yeah, you just create a system and then use that system, don't you? Kind of like you with everything to do with this podcast. Can we finally move on from that fight then?
Yes, we can.
All said our piece.
We're done. And I expect no follow-up on that.
I'm sure there'll be none. So, the main event. Main events have had a bit of a habit of being slight letdowns. Bronco versus Bombshell.
Sorry,
not the longest of fights.
I want to do to you what you've done to me in the past. Before we get into that fight, at this point in the show, there's a section where they're sort of showing stuff from like the Monsoon Petunia fight, like some of the damage. And I just want to talk about the music in that section, right? Because I am almost offended by that music.
Oh yeah, they went for some kind of quintessentially British thing, didn't they?
The quaint, almost British rubbish. Why was that there? I didn't like it at all.
Because shorthand, because TV editing, I suppose. I was too busy focusing on what was being said. I didn't really notice it.
It stood out to me as just like I don't know. I didn't like it. Like I said, I'm almost offended, but I don't take it seriously enough to be actually offended. But I mean, I didn't like it though. Like it's not. I don't think it was cool to do that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how quintessentially British do you think you are?
Me?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm the right person to judge that.
Well, no, you have to have a self-judgment. It's your self-judgment which is interesting.
A self-judgment. So what is 10 like the most British? Well,
10 is basically the Queen.
Basically the Queen. Well, I'm not basically the Queen. A 6 or a 7 maybe.
Really? I'm putting myself at like a 2 or a 3. I think apart from having a British accent, I conform to very few modern British values. I'm not racist. I'm not a thug. I'm not a binge drinker. I don't support the England football team. I'm a crazy Panama fan because I'm hoping that someone with more social capital than me will coin the phrase Panamaniac and I can then use it. Yeah, I'm very un-British. I'm tolerant. I'm respectful. I'm not British. I ain't no Brit.
Ain't no Brit. This is why it's hard to judge, because like, how do you define Britishness? I'm sort of like, I would put myself like a 6 or 7 or whatever, because it's sort of like, well, just by the fact that I am British, there's a lot about me that is probably therefore British. But then there's other things like, the classic, like quintessentially British, and there's things like, I don't like tea, for example. Does that make me
Tea
not
is
British?
stupid. Yeah, you're already getting deported for that.
So maybe that alone is enough to put me at like a 0.
And the thing is, I do like British food. I
Yeah.
like stodge. I'm a big stodge fan.
British food is good. The other sort of big thing about me that I guess is not British is that I am constantly annoyed by the fact that buildings in the UK do not have air conditioning. I do not understand why this country does not like air conditioning. No modern buildings other than office buildings have air conditioning. We
That's
live
why
in a
you
country.
moved to the US, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a draw to the US, but there are a lot of more things that push me away at the moment. But like, we live in a country that gets hot, right? It happens, yeah. So put air conditioning in the buildings that people live in.
Thing is, this hasn't been a country that gets hot for all that long.
I don't believe that. I think it has probably always got, maybe not for significant chunks of the year, but like, the thing is, even if it's only hot for 3 weeks, those 3 weeks are hell for all British people everywhere, and we could solve that problem so easily.
Is it worth putting a system in place to mitigate against a problem that exists for so little of the year?
But you can use that system not only for cooling a house down, but you could use that for heating the house as well.
Not very eco, though, is it? We're a very ecologically conscious nation.
Oh, are we? Are we now? We did what? How long did we go without coal? We went like several hours without coal for a
No, we
bit.
went like 3 days or something.
Or 3
and
days, yeah.
The fact that that was considered an achievement is an indicator of the problem.
I was saying, we should compare that to what Germany does.
Well, see, the difference is they didn't have their own coal to be reliant on. We, as a literal and figurative island nation, it's weird. It's weird how I said that, like the country, not like the geographical feature. Even though they're pronounced the same, I feel like I said that like the country. As an island nation, we had that sort of real self-sufficiency thing going on that just made us make bad choices and has made us very anti-progress ever since.
Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of being penalised for having an industrial revolution quite early. The other big thing that always suffers from this is road networks and rail networks.
Oh.
They're just awful in the UK because of how early they were constructed.
One of the only things I can ever give Stevenage credit for is being a news town and therefore having half-decent roads.
Yeah.
Roads that thought ahead.
Oh god, driving through little villages is just horrible.
Oh, it's cute. It's quaint.
Oh yes, it's really quaint when you're driving around a blind corner and there's this big off SUV coming at you at 40 miles an hour in a 30.
Taking the kids to and from school, because God forbid they walk. Although on roads like that,
It's always tiny people behind the wheels of those big cars as well. Can't see over the steering wheel. Their nose pressed up. Can't see where you're going.
When's Hannah getting her 4x4 then?
It's unacceptable. I won't let it happen.
Just strap in a booster seat, it'll be fine. This feels wrong when she's not in on the conversation.
We have a fight to talk about.
We do indeed. Another highly satisfying main event. Bronco versus Bombshell.
This was a satisfying main event. What are you on about?
Was it?
I thought so. You got out of the arena. It doesn't happen very often in BattleBots.
Yeah, but I fully expected that to happen. I was hoping there'd be a bit more bashy first.
I'm Ryan. I want long, drawn-out fights.
Yeah, pretty much. I want every fight between two spinners to go the distance.
Yeah.
I want nothing but judges' decisions to create controversy to talk about.
Nothing but split judges' decisions.
Oh yeah, every one, because then I get to explain all of them. It's becoming my most valuable contribution to this show.
You know when they've done those like melees with 3 robots in, and that went for 3 minutes? What do you do in a situation if each judge votes for a different robot?
I believe there's technically a head judge who has the casting vote, but I don't know who... In fact, that's common in a lot of tournaments. I don't actually know if that's true in BattleBots. I'd have to check with the rules.
I don't even know who that would be. There's no obvious choice.
Probably whoever sat in the middle.
Okay, so Naomi in this case then.
Yeah, which I'm sure will go down really well. Chomp for Series 3 champions. Judges' decisions all the way again.
That scenario where there was like a 3-way split and it went to Chomp. I just leave Reddit. It's just not worth going there anymore.
Oh, we have to leave this behind because I have so much more I could say about people's opinions on Chomp, and I don't want to go there anymore.
What do you think of Bronco's armour?
Really weird choice for this fight. It's an idea that I love. I think as an anti-drum armour, it is absolutely ingenious. But I think against Bombshell, all it's done is make it easier for them to get under, and the disc can still get a perfectly good bite. The only way that armour is helping is if they come straight at it with the disc.
Even then, I think this might work reasonably well against something like either Minotaur or Reality, maybe, that doesn't have like a big, very effective wedge on the front of their robot. So all they sort of achieved here was made it very, very easy for Bombshell to get under Bronco and then conceivably do a lot of damage to the underside of Bronco, which I would guess is not as well armoured as everything else.
I mean, I imagine this is purely a Minotaur defence. That's all it is, because Minotaur is going to come under. They're wide enough that they're going to sort of lift Bronco up via one of those bits of armour, and they're therefore not going to be able to get a good bite on a wheel or the side or anything like that. I think, compared to solid armour, I think it could be a lot more effective. I think it's a really creative approach.
Yeah, and with Minotaur in particular, because the drum doesn't like protrude above the top of the robot, so there's much less room there for Minotaur to do damage to the bottom of Bronco in that case. But yeah, I think it's a bad choice in this fight.
Yeah.
Not that it hurt them too much.
No, but it did make the fight harder than it needed to be for them.
Yeah.
And they were, for a large part of the fight, I think, outdriven by Bombshell. Because Bombshell was getting around to the side and they weren't getting a chance to get the flipper in. But as soon as they did, they capitalised.
Yeah, and until they got that one flip, which I'm going to say it, I think that was such a close little nick, I thought. They weren't, I don't know. Until they got that one flip, Bombshell were all over them, really.
And it's testament to the power of that flipper that barely winging them still sent them flying. They said at the top of the show that it was the most powerful flipper in the sport, and yeah, I completely believe that.
Yeah, I mean, the height they were throwing Bombshell to in the end, while not as high as, I don't think it was as high as what they were claiming on the TV show, but I mean, they were throwing them pretty damn high. Like, that's not to be sniffed at.
Well, the fact that a flipper designed to throw stuff straight up rather than forwards has managed to throw a robot out of the arena, off of the wall, and back into the arena says a lot about its power. That was an incredible launch.
Yeah, crazy.
It was also interesting hearing the Bronco team get a chance to explain the difficulty involved in facing a robot like Bronco. Because they're saying it doesn't matter what armour you've got, we're just going to damage your insides when you hit the floor. Yeah, that idea of we're going to damage your robot even though it looks like we're not, I think is something that really needs pointing out to a lot of sort of more casual viewers. It's really easy to look at a flipper as, oh, it just turns stuff over. Oh, it just throws it in the air a bit. It's like, no, those are some of the hardest hits you're going to see. If your robot's falling to the ground from 2 or 3 metres up in the air, that's going to do big damage internally if you're not completely prepared for it.
Yeah, in many ways, it's often surprising that robots can survive that at all. In some ways, they're damaging things.
As a final point on this fight, I was a bit confused at first by the fact that there was a countdown being done on Bombshell, even though they were out of the arena.
Yeah.
It turns out that in BattleBots, if you're able to, you're allowed to re-enter the arena and carry on. So say something like Beta had got put out, there's potential that a good swing of the hammer could get them back in and they could just carry on.
That would be so cool.
Or a Bronco, if it got put out and was upside down, it could easily right itself back in.
Yeah. Well, that would explain it then.
Bit worried about the idea of a robot doing that right next to the Lexan, but I suppose they do it enough around the arena anyway that it's not any significantly worse.
No, I would say that's probably fine.
Is there much hope for Bombshell going forwards?
I just think it's got the fact that it can't self-right and it seems, I'm almost inclined to say it seems quite easy to flip. Because a robot that isn't a flipper has flipped it. So you sort of go...
I think we're at a point now where so many robots can flip you because there are so many vertical spinners. It doesn't have to be a flipper that gets you over.
Yeah. So I think I would be amazed if they did well, to be honest.
I'm really worried that they're going to carry on like this. Maybe they'll get a win. Maybe they'll even get 2. And I'm worried that they'll be brought into the final 16 just by virtue of the fact they were runners-up last season. Even though it's a completely different machine.
I think that's very likely. And I think if they lost every fight, then they probably wouldn't. But yeah, if they win one or...
Oh, I feel like they still might.
They still might, but I think it's a very small chance. But obviously, yeah, if they win 1 or 2, then I think they're almost certainly going to stay in just because of the name.
Mm. And it's a shame because there are a lot of good machines that we know are going to go out just by virtue of it being narrowed down this much. And the thought that a machine is going to get in on reputation alone. Obviously, we haven't seen their final 2 fights. They could be really convincing wins. It could be that they really do earn it. But I'm worried that there were a couple of robots that might make it through on name alone. And that could be really harsh on some very good machines.
Yeah, downsides of being a TV show, I guess.
Mm. Is there anyone so far that you think is an absolute shoo-in for that final 16? Excluding Tombstone, obviously. 2 wins and reigning champion, they're in. They were in no matter what. That's one that I would be okay with getting in on reputation alone, the reigning champion.
Yeah, so there's the obvious ones like Tombstone. I think Minotaur will get in. I suspect Monsoon will at this point.
Mm.
I think they'd be mad not to do it. Sawblaze again, I think would probably get in, probably.
Mm-hmm. I think Huge have booked their place as well, realistically.
Huge. Yeah.
I think that, when they're selecting that 16, they're going to want variety. So if you are any kind of unique, you've already got a very good chance. As long as you're unique and a bit effective, you're there.
Yeah. I suspect they'll take one or the other between Shredderator and Gigabyte.
I don't think they'll take Shredderator at this point.
I think they're more likely to take Gigabyte now that Shredderator's had 2 fights where it's stopped working of its own volition. So more likely to take Gigabyte.
I feel like Blacksmith should get through, realistically. I think they're going to want a hammer, and I don't think it's going to be Chomp.
Yeah, I don't know about either of them, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if neither made it in.
Oh, I think Blacksmith, they have a couple more fights. I don't see them losing both of them. I think they're too solid a machine for that. I'll be very upset if it doesn't make it through as well, because I think it's just a cool machine.
Do you reckon the Horsemen would make it in because they're a multi-bot or not? I don't think they should. I hope they don't, in many ways.
They'd have to get at least another win for me to think that was valid.
Yeah.
I think they create some interesting matchups. So in that respect, I can see them getting through. But it depends on the strength of other machines. The thing we're going to see, in particular, is we're going to see a lot of vertical spinners that have got a few wins. And it's whether they choose to let all of those through, or they shoot for that variety. Yeah, if, for example, Lockjaw, Hypershock, Bombshell, Endgame, Brutus, Witch Doctor, if all of them make the final 16, that's already over a third verticals. So they might want to thin that herd a bit. Although that's a big if, particularly with Witch Doctor.
I'd love to see Hypershock fight more.
Well, we should see 3 more fights from it at least.
Yeah, we're going to get more, yeah. But
in fact, I believe we've potentially got them coming up next episode. I can't remember where I read that. But I think that was based on the assumption that everything's being done in order, which it still might not be.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, that, I suppose, concludes this episode. I've seen a lot of people saying this was the best episode yet. I'm not sure I agree. I'm still a big fan of the first episode.
Yeah, I don't think it's the best one, but I mean, this is sort of really cementing for me that this is one of the. I think this is one of the best series of like combat robot things I've seen. Actually, I'm not sure anything will ever quite reach the pinnacle that was the series finale of series 10 of Robot Wars. That episode was just a high point for me, but I think just in terms of the consistency of the enjoyment of this series, I think it's fantastic. It's up there every single time. I'm really enjoying watching it.
If anything, I'm now worried that the final 16 will be worse television than these episodes have been.
It's very possible, yeah.
Once they stop curating the fights, I think we could get some real duds, especially with combat fatigue in the mix for so many machines. But, some people find upsets so entertaining that they'd probably love whatever happens if good machines are too tired to fight on.
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episode/33. And there you can find links to all the stuff we've been talking about today. You can also find a link to our Twitter at Spinnerproof, where you can tweet to us your favourite power tool.
So I suppose it's time for episode 2 of slightly self-indulgent health news. So I've been having quite an interesting couple of months, where I have, partly as a result of the kind of therapy I'm doing and partly as something I've wanted to do for a very long time, I've been getting myself assessed for autism, which I'll say right now you don't necessarily fully agree with, which I find very interesting. This is one of those things where I, for a very, very, very long time, since I started working with largely autistic kids, really, when I was 18, so that's a good 10 years ago now, I've thought, and a lot of people around me have thought, that I might be somewhere on the spectrum. And I've gone through with that knowledge for years. I've never really cared about it. I've often thought, seeing it's something that we're not going to treat or change, there was no point getting it diagnosed and getting the label. So I sort of went through going, well, there's no point. I either am or I'm not. It doesn't change anything. And recently I've been more and more bothered by the idea of, you know what, I just really want to know. And I think that my view of labels has changed quite a lot. I used to be very anti-label, but as I've gone on, I've kind of started to realise that labels about people, especially about sort of medical things like, this person is anxious or depressed, those labels can actually be quite useful. They're a really nice shorthand to have where, knowing that someone, for example, has Asperger's, it doesn't tell you who they are, but it gives you a starting point. And I think I've seen more and more situations in my life where giving people that starting point would be helpful. So I've gone through a process of filling out every form ever made, many of them asking the same questions over and over again. I have, at multiple points, written my complaints about the quality of the forms on the forms. Because why wouldn't I? Today, I spent the best part of an hour filling out these forms, one of which was just 10 questions from another form put on their own separate form for no reason. Just absolutely infuriating stuff. But I finally got a meeting with a human being, and after about an hour and a half of sitting down talking to them, they have decided that while the final assessment has not been done, there's about an 18-month waiting list for that, they have decided that I am probably autistic in some way. And I cannot tell you how happy I am about that. This isn't like being told you've got a sort of disease where it's sort of, oh, this is going to start a really long journey of bad stuff. It's sort of, finally, I was bloody right. That is my overwhelming feeling right now, just of being right.
Fair enough. I mean, you mentioned that it's not that I disagree with you getting an assessment for these things. You've got to do what's right for you, and the fact that this is sort of like a resolution for you, and I think it's great that you've got it and that you've got an answer, and I hope it helps you a lot.
I mean, it's not a definitive answer yet. That's the problem.
Yeah,
there is a full-on assessment that I still need to do, which I'm not going to get for at least a year and a half. So what I currently have is the considered opinion of an expert whose belief based on available evidence is that I am very likely to have ASD. And that's the best I'm going to get for a while. So hopefully at some point there will be a full-blown thing. I don't know if you get like a membership card or a certificate or a key fob or something. I'm desperately hoping there's some kind of party, even though I don't like parties. But until then, I'll at least get a letter that I can throw at my university and say, take me back, please.
It's a yearly party for all the people that were diagnosed autistic that year. Here's a thing that none of you are going to like.
Yeah.
Let's put you in a small room with loud music. Enjoy.
We're going to run our nails down a chalkboard occasionally.
Oh, God.
But no, I thought the main thing I want to do with this sort of 10, 20 minutes of airtime is just explain some of the things that made me convinced enough to go and do this. The things that I think set apart, the sort of basic idea of being awkward or being quirky from things that are actually, I was going to say red flags, that's not quite fair, but things that are significant traits of autism. Because as I alluded to earlier in recording, I don't know if it'll be in podcast, but in recording, I did have a bit of an argument on Reddit the other day with someone who seemed to think that they could diagnose Asperger's via a Reddit comment, which made me angrier than it should have. And I think it's also going to be the things that you maybe haven't seen from me that made you more sceptical of whether this was going to be a sort of a yes as a diagnosis, I suppose.
Yeah, so I mean, before you sort of did this, when you were originally talking about it, I think I fairly definitively said, I don't think you have autism. Not that I'm a medical expert anyway, but that was my feeling. But I mean, you're right. I don't see you very often. Most of our communication is through this podcast. So it's like, well, at least a solid half of our communication, I would say, is through this anyway.
More than that, for sure.
So yeah, like that's why I sort of felt the way I did, and I guess part of that is possibly also an element of projection on my part. Every now and again, the idea in my head like pops in my head of like, do I have autism or am I on the spectrum? I think the answer could very well be yes, but I guess I'm probably more like where you were a few years ago of just not caring one way or the other. So maybe one day when I'm nearly 30, I'll go and get the same question answered. But
I should point out that the people around me that know the most about autism are also the most skeptical.
Fair enough.
Which I find very interesting. This idea of people think they understand what it is and they haven't got a clue. They basically go, "Oh yeah, that Sheldon bloke. That's what that is." Whereas once people know the complexities of it, they see all the other things that could explain the things you're seeing.
Yeah. I think the overwhelming thing for me about this and many other of these sort of disorders, I guess, is whether or not they have a meaningful impact on your day-to-day life. And I've never perceived that it does for you, but then I don't know your day-to-day life, so I'm in no position to judge. And this is why there's an element of projection where it's like I don't think it has any meaningful impact on my day-to-day life, so I don't think it would be.
And that is something that I've been told could be a barrier to a full diagnosis. I was having this conversation the other day, and because it's a diagnosis of a medical condition, there's this kind of sense that you can't, it's a diagnosis of something being wrong. And if it's not having a negative impact on you, can it be something that is wrong, or is it something that you see as a difference or even an ability rather than a disorder? So, if you have the traits and you are doing just fine, I suppose it is valid to say there is no diagnosis there. There is no condition there. There's just a set of things that are true about you that are also true about people with that diagnosis.
I guess the diagnosis would make it, like you said, having that label would be a convenient shorthand for explaining things. Like, if when I make a beeline for a corner of a room or leave because of loud music and stuff, it's sort of like it might be a convenient shorthand for explaining that behaviour. But then it's like I don't want to. One of the things that I don't want to do, and I was hesitant of this around like the depression and anxiety stuff as well, is I don't want that to sort of just become me. I don't want to be the depressed person. I don't want to be the autistic person either.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And that is something that I've kind of thought about as well. This idea of, yes, it's a useful shorthand, but it can also, for some people, they want it to be the longhand as well. I'm not even sure if that, as a piece of language, makes sense, but you get what I mean.
Do you feel like you have had a tipping point of where it was sort of like the benefits of having that shorthand for you overwhelmed the potential negative impacts of it?
Yes, kind of, probably about 6 months ago, where I sort of changed living situation, and I think things became more obvious to me in that respect. Having to deal with change, for starters, was a big thing with that. So I was going to say about some things that I think take this from quirky to condition, and one of them is the fact that if I come into this room and something has been moved, I cannot settle down until I've moved it back. So if I come in and someone has moved a towel that was folded up, I've got to put it back there or the world is not right. And I really struggled a couple of weeks ago because a piece of furniture that was in my room got moved out of it. And every time I came through the door and that piece of furniture wasn't there, I had a mini freak out. My brain just went, something's not right. I got into sort of full anxiety mode. It was proper fight or flight stuff of something's wrong. Even though I knew it, I could have told myself before coming through that door, oh, by the way, remember that's not there anymore. My brain still went into that mode and went, get out of this situation. So that's one of the big things. And I know I've always done that. It's just I've become more aware of it recently.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because I've got no experience of that myself. I'm quite open to rearranging rooms. If I sometimes, if I remember when I was living at home with my parents and stuff, and my mum would occasionally like rearrange something, or I did come home once, she had completely rearranged my room, and it was fine. Like it's sort of like, oh, that's changed, and then I got over it. So
I think if I'd done it, I'd be more okay with it. But for example, I've gone in. I remember when I was younger, I'd sort of come home and someone had rearranged the furniture in the living room. I would not want to go in that room, and I think it's why I've always been very keen on my own space, because I know that things aren't going to change there.
Yeah, you're in control of it all.
I mean, God, I've gone through 2 house remodels when I've been renting places, and that's been the worst times. No, that's massive hyperbole, but yeah, that was horrible for me. And another change that I recently really objected to, which kind of touches on another point, is that we recently got new chopping boards, and I've been very upset about that ever since. Now, there are 2 angles to this. First of all, I think the old one was better. It was wooden, and wooden is good in antibacterial terms. It takes water away from the surface. Bacteria can't live without water. And it was replaced on the grounds of it was believed to be unsanitary, which I don't believe to be true. So I was angry about that. But more importantly, and I'm smiling to myself as I say this because I know how ridiculous it will sound, but it was replaced with the sort of stone one. And the noise a knife makes on that,
Oh, God.
I cannot cope with.
I'd throw it out, mate. I'd just throw it out and buy a wooden one.
I'd love to. I'd burn it if it weren't inflammable, which still means it burns. But you know what I mean.
Take it to Mount Doom.
Yeah, it's got to the point where I quite like cooking, and I'm quite fast with a knife. And if I'm using that thing, I am now just going so slowly. I don't want to cook anymore. It's that bad. Because that sound just triggers something. It's hypersensitivity is what it is. That sound in my head just ends me. I'm out of that situation.
Completely with you. That would destroy me as well. That's the kind of noise that I live in fear of those noises. And it's why I live in fear of tinnitus, because having a constant ringing, I don't know what I'd do. But yeah, get rid of it, mate. Like,
I wish it were in my power.
Just take whatever repercussions will happen and replace it with a wooden chopping board, because a wooden chopping board is clearly the superior chopping board.
It really is, yeah. And I don't know which part I'm more upset about, to be honest. But what I'm now imagining is a situation like that Christmas episode of White Mirror, where I get rid of it and then I turn around and it's back. And that just goes on loop for the rest of my life. And I don't want that.
That's it. No, that wouldn't be fun.
Another thing that I've always had that I've sort of been told could be emblematic of this as well is to do with touch. Have you been to a shop with me before?
Probably like being around the supermarket with you, yeah. But
I'm just wondering if you've ever been in a situation where I'm handed change.
No.
See, I have a literal problem with change as well as a more figurative one, in that I cannot and will not touch copper coins. And I always had that down as a phobia, which I thought was kind of bored of a Simpsons episode where Homer squeezes a penny and it goes into his arm. But I've been told that actually could be an example of a sort of issue with touch. And I have that with a lot of other things. I don't like touching other people's keys. I don't like touching fine chain, which is a really specific thing that really weirds me out. I won't sleep on bedding that other people have used. I will take a sleeping bag to a hotel. And all these little things that I've always just seen as quirks, when you put them together, it actually adds up to quite a big picture. It is, for the record, it isn't a germophobia thing. It's not that at all. It's just there are things I get freaked out about in ways that I can't explain. I have had people, when I tell them about the copper coin thing, decide that is the perfect time to test out how much of a problem I have with it. And they are the worst people.
It's a weird instinct to have. I feel like I'd have that instinct as well, and I'm sorry.
I do it to someone else, because I have no empathy. That's another. I did an empathy test today. It was basically a 0. It's like, basically, I learned I don't give a shit about people, but boy, do I care about animals. Which I think I knew anyway.
Do you know what it is about copper? Is it specifically copper coins? If you had like a copper pipe, would that do it as well?
Copper piping, fine. Deal with that regularly.
So it's not that it's copper. It's just the coin bit of it.
It isn't about any material property or anything like that. It is just a thing that my brain has decided I don't deal with.
Weird.
Which, considering I'm someone that tries to be so rational all the time, is really uncomfortable. Two more things that I want to touch on here that are sort of things that are beyond awkward or whatever, sort of beyond OCD and things like that. I have a big thing with strings of information. And this is something that I've done for a very long time, and it makes me quite good at countdown, which is that whenever I see words, I am constantly rearranging the letters. And I cannot stop. And I quite enjoy it. But it turns out when you can't stop that kind of thing, it's classed as a symptom. So yeah, that's one that's sort of there. I quite like it. I don't consider it a problem at all, but they say it is, so who am I to judge? And then the last one, probably the most striking of all. Have you ever done one of those things where you get shown loads of pictures of facial expressions and you've got to identify what they are?
No.
I recommend you give it a go, because I don't stand a chance. I have a love affair with the Museum of Natural History in Oxford, and I will go in there on a regular basis just to see if there's anything new. And I went in there about a year ago, and they had a big neuroscience display. It was really interesting. And one part of it was about 8 pictures of different facial expressions, and it was basically a game for children to match up the expression to the feeling. I got a 0. And it's like...
Oh, man.
No, you know, any test, no matter what it is, if you're getting a 0, that's not good. You're not meant to get zeros. This is designed for children. You're supposed to get an 8. And I'm just there as a 27-year-old man zeroing it. And at that point, it was kind of, yeah, that's not good. I can't tell the difference between joy and fear, apparently. You know, it's that. But I'm kind of hyperbolizing here because entertainment and making light of slightly bad situations. But yeah, it turns out I am hilariously emotionally illiterate.
Yeah, I'm not sure how good I'd be at that. I don't really don't know. Could go either way.
I think you should do it just just to find out and publish the results, you know.
So can I ask you about something that I experience?
Mm-hmm.
That you might also do. You sort of like you said about hypersensitivity. I would sort of like about being over. Well, I've made reference to like loud music and stuff, and a feeling of being very overwhelmed by it. So do you? I'll be off. If I go to like the pub and stuff with people, I'll be fine for a while, and then at some point, the way I've always been able to characterize it in my head, is that there's me, the machine of me, which is my body, and then inside my head, behind my eyes, is a little man. Right, who's controlling everything?
What's his name?
It doesn't have a name, but the little man between him and the outside world is this machine, and this machine has a bunch of filters, right? So it's filtering out a bunch of noise that the machine knows the man doesn't have to care about, and it filters them out. And I feel like every now and again, the filters just stop, they just break, and then all of a sudden, it's like you must now process every single noise that you can hear, and then I can't hear what anyone is saying anymore because I can hear everything that everyone's saying in the room, and it's a pain in the ass. Is this something that you get?
I think I get that without the first part. I think that's just my default.
Okay.
I am incredibly bad with trying to have any kind of conversation in any kind of loud place, or any conversation in a group as well. I find incredibly difficult to keep track of. And for quite a long time, I thought that was a hearing issue, but I've had a hearing test and it's not. Which again was another thing actually with this. I like environments with music. I really love live music. But if I'm in a pub and there's a band playing and a friend is trying to talk to me, they are wasting their time. Because I am just listening to that music and screw them.
I'd like to just put this out there to the wider audience then. It's sort of like, because, you know, this sort of like filter breakdown. Just out of curiosity now, is this a thing that many people experience? Because a big part of like what I've tried, I always try to recalibrate normal for me and make sure that I have a sensible understanding of what normal is. So yeah, if I'd like to know if this happens, if you get the filter, I get it mainly on sound. It can happen with visual stuff as well. If something's very visually noisy, I might have to just go away from it for a bit. But it's mostly noise that does it for me. But I'd be curious to know if this impacts other people.
And that to me has been a big part of this, and probably why I'm in such a good mood today. This idea of all these things I've been wondering, do other people experience these? Am I an anomaly to the degree that it can be recognised? And finding out that I am has been quite comforting, because I'm no longer sat here worrying if everyone else is going through the same thing and just not being bothered by it. And in fact, one more thing on that front, which I don't know if I've asked you this already, but it'd be nice to ask an audience. It's something I've been asking a lot of people lately. What's it like in your head when you're thinking? What's happening in there?
I'm having a conversation with myself. I talk to myself a lot.
And that's exactly what I experience as well. And I've been told today that's probably more common than I gave it credit for.
I think it is quite common. So, like, for example, when I was thinking through all this wedge stuff, and also the sorry to bring it up again, but like the chomp split decision thing, that was basically just worked through as about 3 or 4 repeats of the conversation that we had, because it's sort of like I'm sort of
oral rehearsal.
Yeah. So it's like I'm going through the conversation and then almost emulating the other person and stuff, and it's weird. And
I'm guessing you always win that argument as well, don't you?
No.
You imagine arguments that you lose.
Yeah, because in the act, not like on purpose,
amazing.
Not on purpose, but in the act of trying to sort of like I said, trying to emulate the other person, that forces me to sort of shift my view. And in doing so, I might realise that I'm genuinely wrong about something. And I know you're laughing at me and this is ridiculous to lose an argument in your own head, but I genuinely think that's a valuable thing to be able to do.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm now worried about myself for always winning these arguments. I mean, the main thing that's got me realising that lately, which is something that we were going to try and talk about, but we haven't really had the chance, is that I've been encouraged to try meditation recently. And I'm not getting on with it, because I'm sat there. There's this whole idea that you're meant to be observing thoughts as they go past, whereas I'm literally there with this internal commentary of going, any thoughts yet? Nope. But what is a thought? And then I've just got this whole conversation going on, which just makes it borderline impossible.
I think you've just got to stick with it and practice. Not that I'm an expert on this thing, but like from what I've heard, that doesn't sound like an uncommon experience to me from what I've read about meditation. It might take weeks for you to get to the point where you can just observe a thought fly by.
But I'm a special snowflake who's the only person that's ever had this problem. And what works for other people won't work for me. You have to remember that, Sam.
Damn millennial.